Good morning, second hour. Let's talk about what we get to do today and this week. All right, so as you know, it's the last week of the quarter. So for today, I'm going to talk about what you can expect and changes, a little bit about grading, and then we're going to review week 8 answers. So if you haven't had a chance to get that in yet, I would open up your week 8 work right now, that handout. And then today our lesson is going to be Walt Whitman and Individualism. So let's go back here. Quarter 3 grades. So I got quite a few pieces of work from this hour last week, just excellent. So what's left this week is Friday at 11:59 p.m. Your work for week 8 and week 9 is due. So that's another reason why I'm going to review some answers for week 8, help you out with that. All right. One thing that has changed this hour is because more people got in their late work, I got more of the CTA votes, and this class has voted on the side of no at this point. So if you're still interested in getting a CTA, they're still on that YouTube channel. You can have a look at that. So tomorrow we'll start with a review of poetry analysis steps. I've put them all into one slideshow for you so that this week's slides wouldn't be so long, because we have 2 poems we're going to analyze this week. And we'll start the first one tomorrow. It's called I Hear America Singing. And I'll go over that with you, how to analyze it, because I know it's been a bit since you've analyzed a poem. Then Thursday, we'll read and analyze the second poem, which is Song of Myself by Whitman. Typically in past years, we've done a second poet, and that's Emily Dickinson. This year, just to keep your work more manageable for you, this last week of the quarter, I cut the Dickinson stuff. I've still included her poems. You can read them on your own if you're looking for an extra challenge, but I won't be grading you on that. So we'll finish the second poem tomorrow, or pardon me, Thursday, and that'll finish task 3 for you. I promised you last week that I'm trying to plan things so that you have like 3 tasks a week, 4 at most. To me, 3 seems like a better number, and then at least 1 work day. And so this week, your work day is Friday, which again is the due date for getting in late or revised work. I've typed out the overview schedule for you so you can see week by week what we're doing. If you want to preview what we're doing next, you can have a look there. One other thing I've changed aside from CTA is I have canceled open office. Students weren't really using it. Maybe it didn't work with their schedule. Who knows? Here's your week 9 checklist. You can double check this before you get your work in. All right, so at this point, I'm going to review your week 8 work, so your work from last week, review some of those answers. So if you haven't had a chance yet, go ahead and open that up. Then I'm going to move to preview what you're going to write for this week and then give you the lesson for today. So let's switch to the week 8 work. And this is in that examples folder as per usual. All right, so let's review some of these answers for you. So number 1, Henry David Thoreau was a rebel all his life. Write one example of him acting in a rebellious way, and you had several to choose from in the notes. So here's your example answer. Feel free to take it. One of the things he did was he wore green robes in college instead of the black that he was required to wear. Freshmen at Harvard had to wear green robes back then, but not Thoreau. I'm going to pause so you can get that, and then we'll move to the next answer. So this one you can find right in the notes, and I always write the questions in order so you don't have to keep going back and forth. So what's one reason why Henry David Thoreau is significant to American literature? Next, we read and analyzed Walden. So question 3 is, what reasons does Thoreau give for moving to the woods? Discuss your opinions on them. So he explains after describing his cabin that he wants to live more fully and he thinks being in nature will help that. So that's the first part of the question, is what reasons does he give? And then you folks need to come up with the second part, which is discuss your opinions on them. I've stopped putting opinion examples in here because folks just copy them outright, and I want your opinion. All right, so here's number 3 for you. You're going to pause. You can write the reasons for him moving to the woods and then your opinion on those reasons. Okay, question 4. In the space below, write one piece of advice or imagery in Walden, and then again, your reaction or opinion to it. So 2 parts to that question. So you can either summarize in your own words what he says or use a text citation. I used a text citation, and you are welcome to take this answer. So I took the description of his cabin. I took that as imagery. So the upright white hewn studs and freshly planed door and window casings gave it a clean and airy look. So I got quotation marks at the start. I have these ellipses here to show that I didn't take the entire sentence. End quotes here. Parentheses, last name of the author, and the page number. Typically don't quote line or don't cite lines unless it's a poem. Pausing for a second here, and then we'll move on. So next we read Thoreau's essay, Civil Disobedience. Number 5, describe the background events in Thoreau's life that led to him writing Civil Disobedience. And most of the ones I've seen, people got this one right. So you can absolutely take this answer. He spent a night in jail after refusing to pay his poll tax to protest 2 things, the war against Mexico and slavery, which was still legal at this time. Emancipation Proclamation didn't happen until 1886, 56. But slavery was still legal in Thoreau's lifetime. All right, number 6. Thoreau gives several arguments for why citizens should reject the ideas of majority rule in government and follow their own conscience against the state. Detail one of his arguments in the space below, or cite a line from the text that clearly shows one of these arguments. So I went with the second one to give you another example of a text citation. So I chose, but a government in which the majority rule in all cases cannot be based on justice, even as far as men understand it. So here I took the whole line, but still punctuation goes outside, just like that. For the next question, number 7, you have to decide which of the 3 transcendentalist beliefs you think is shown most in the essay. So if you don't recall those 3, go back into the slides and find either the notes that I wrote on transcendentalism, or you can use that slide that Fedora prepared with the 3 beliefs. And both are included in the old section of your notes. All right, and then for number 8, you're showing that you can write it the correct text citation. You either choose a piece of advice, argument, or opinion, and then give your reaction. Like I had said last week, you absolutely can take one of these from the examples and then give your opinion on it. That's not a problem. It doesn't say it has to be a new text citation. All right, so that's number 8. That's week 8. At this point, I'm going to open up week 9 and preview for you what you'll write today. So I would, of course, suggest you open week 9 as well. So here's your grading for this week. Your grading is all formative this week. So that's the 40% aspect of your grade. So the first 5 points are graded on students' work shows an understanding of Romanticism, Individualism, and Whitman's significance, as well as reading comprehension shown through correct poetry analysis if I hear America singing. So this analysis is included with the other notes because I'm going to do it with you. The second poetry analysis this week, Song of Myself, shows comprehension as well as understanding on how you use text citations correctly by including at least one. So we're still practicing this skill because you need it for your assessment paragraph at the end of the unit. All right, so here's where we'll start writing today, task 1. So here's what you're going to be writing based on the lesson I give you. So first, we're going to review American Romanticism. You just need to write one characteristic of American Romanticism. And yes, I will give you several. Second thing you get to write on today is a thing called individualism. So this is a new term you get to learn about. Unless, of course, you've taken government, then you may have heard of it before. So you're going to write one key idea in individualism. There's going to be 3 to choose from. You need to write one. And then final question for today's work, I'm going to teach you about Walt Whitman, about his life. So what do you find? You get a choice. Pick what's most interesting about him to you or what's significant about him, and then explain. So if you say, I think blah, blah, blah is the most interesting, explain why you think it's interesting. Or if you choose, this is why he's significant, tell me how you know. All right. So let's teach you these things so we can write these answers. So first off, a little review of American Romanticism. Here's the essential questions. So comparing and contrasting Puritans and Native Americans. We've learned what is transcendentalism, what is satire, and we're learning about different writing forms, including today a new one called individualism. So here's some of the terms that you've been doing so far. And you took a quiz already on satire and Irving, and then the last assessment will be a compare and contrast paragraph with at least one clear citation. So Romanticism, here's some of the characteristics of it. You only need to write one. So overview, it's a literary movement, basically in the 1800s. It ended at the Civil War because everyone was very preoccupied with war. They didn't have time to be thinking about these things. Most of the writers are from New England. And characteristics, here's the things they believed in and wrote about. So truth and inspiration in nature, fear of industrialization, big on individual freedoms. They had nostalgia, mostly for nature. They were interested in the supernatural. We haven't seen a lot of that in our readings because that's more Melville, Hawthorne, and Poe. And they believe that imagination and emotion were way more important than realism, way more important than facts. Definitely not ooey gooey love stories. People hear romanticism, they think, oh, romance. Not the same thing. Just going to pause on that for a moment so you can get one characteristic, and then we get to talk about individualism. So individualism, this is the last genre of our romanticism unit. So it's considered, this term is either a subgenre of romanticism, or you can think of it as the end result of romanticism's influence. So this is a concept you'll see in literature and in political science. So people use this term to describe how others act. Individualism is a big part of American culture, starting with Whitman to now. So there's a few key ideas in individualism, and most of them were inspired by Emerson's essay that we read, Self-Reliance. So here's the 3 key ideas. You need to write at least one on your handout. So idea number 1 of individualism. The individual needs are more important than the needs of society or community. And you can probably see that in your daily American life. Second key idea for individualism is they believe people should be self-reliant and largely ignore the opinions of others. You got to march to the beat of your own drummer, in other words. Third key idea for individualism is they believe freedom of the individual is key so that a person can get to self-realization. In other words, the best possible version of themselves. So this is kind of a precursor to the hippie movement in the 60s, but it's an underlying thing in most American politics and society. So I'm going to pause so you can write at least one of the characteristics of individualism, and then we're going to talk about Walt Whitman to end our lesson today. So here's Walt Whitman in his old age. He kind of looks like a wise old man. And I picked this quote from him because it really sums up, it's really individualism, artistically expressed. So happiness, not in another place, but this place. Not for another hour, but this hour. So individualists really also believed in make the most out of the present. Past is done, future is unsure. Keep your focus in the here and now. So let's talk about this Walt Whitman gentleman. And I included in the beginning notes divider section a picture of him when he was younger. So you can see them crazy eyebrows. So he's different from our other authors in Romanticism in that usually the first thing I wrote for notes for you for every one of these other authors was what, Ivy League school they attended as a child, as a prodigy. Walt Whitman's different. He dropped out of school at 11. He came from a big family and he dropped out of school to work jobs to support the family. So he had a different past than a lot of our other authors. Some of the jobs he's had, and some of these are better than others. Office boy, that's exactly what it sounds like. You're pretty much a gopher. Typesetter, editor, teacher. That one he said was one of the tougher jobs. Carpenter, journalist, novelist. He tried just about everything. He also said he enjoyed carpentry. So his early writing wasn't that distinguished or different from other people's. He wrote some poems, short stories. He even wrote a novel. Everyone was kind of meh about it. Here's what changed his writing. He read Emerson. He read Emerson's poetry, which we haven't studied, but he also read Emerson's essay, Self-Reliance. And that really inspired him to start experimenting with his writing to find more of a higher truth. So he started writing about nature, humanity, and he started writing in what he called spiritual language. So in other words, talking about himself a lot is what it amounts to with Whitman. So in the 1850s, he did something that his family thought was crazy. He quit his job. He had a steady journalism job, but he felt it was just draining him. So he quit his job to write a book of poetry. I can only imagine how my parents would react if I went, yeah, I'm quitting teaching. I'm going to take a year off and write a book of poetry. They would probably raise their eyebrows and then have much to say. But that's what he did. He wrote and self-published his most famous work, Leaves of Grass, in 1855. At first, this was 12 poems in the first edition, but he kept adding on to it every year. And so by the end of his life, this thing was 400 poems. Here is why Whitman is significant to American literature. First of all, he broke all the rules. He was considered our most influential poet because he broke structure rules, he broke grammar rules, and then he wrote in a different kind of form called free verse, which we'll talk about in a moment here. He also was a different poet in that before this, poets usually wrote about things that were very beautiful. They wrote about big theme things. God, beautiful women. It's usually beautiful women and beautiful scenery. He decided you should write about what's real, what you see every day. So his poems also included things that were ugly or common. He was one of the first poets to write about daily American life in that he wrote about people who were working. That's the kind of stuff he was interested in. And because of this, he was one of the first poets that was popular with everybody instead of just scholars. People would read Whitman for fun. A last thing that possibly makes him significant, and representation matters, so I want to include it, he's very likely America's first gay poet. And we know this from his letters. All right, so the last things I want to show you here are, these are some different terms we'll be tackling tomorrow that apply specifically to Walt Whitman. So before this, we learned about iambic pentameter as a form. Walt Whitman wrote in something called free verse. So this is where the poem has no clear rhyme scheme. He tried to make his poems sound more like how people actually talked. He thought that was more important than rhyme. He also did a literary device. He used a literary device called cataloging. This is where you use lists, and that helps set up a rhythm if you don't have rhyme. It also sets up, when you catalog, it sets up that something is important. So if it's been listed several times, if it's repeated, it's important. And then finally, he used a thing called parallelism. It's a literary device where you have one phrase will be very similar to the one before it. So either descriptions or phrasing in the poem are very similar, and that helps create a flow in the mind. And we'll use these tomorrow when we read our first Whitman poem, I Hear America Singing. So you folks at this point have the rest of the time to either work on, so here's Whitman when he was younger. So you folks have the rest of the time to either finish up this task 1 for week 9, or you can also work on finishing week 8 to get that in before Friday. Rest of the time is yours. Use it well. You got this.